Good evening. Hold on a second. What's going on here? Good evening. How's everybody doing? Great to be learning with you on a Thursday. Yom Hamishi. Let's light up the darkness. What is going on? My computer is lagging and showing the video very low res. So hold on a second. Let me just do a little interpretive ballet with the electronics. Kids are home. It sounds like they might be streaming all kinds of stuff. We need a little more bandwidth in the house. Okay, now that seems okay. Okay, who's in the house? Stephen in New Hampshire, Guy in Ohio, Nancy, North Carolina, Joe in the Inland Empire, Karen in Northern California, Melissa in Great Neck, Yehud in South Carolina, Shandora in the Bronx, Bella in Florida, Bill in Missouri, Lucy in Minnesota, Belle in Texas, Michelle in Jupiter. Very hot Jupiter. The golfers were absent from the course. You're telling me it's so hot in Florida that even the golfers aren't out? I believe you. That's hot. Lorraine in Texas, Sharon in New Jersey, Alan in New York City, Haim in Florida, Ella in Southern California. Welcome, everybody. Short daf. It's hot in LA, but I know, our heat does not compare to your heat. Okay, new Mishna, Mishna number 10, the final Mishna here in chapter 4. Short Mishna, short discussion, short daf today. We are on page 61a, right at the top. Avoda Zara, the 27th volume of the Talmud. Like I said, Mishna number 10 in chapter 4. In the case of a Jew who renders the wine of a Gentile permitted by treading the Gentiles' grapes, so that the wine can be sold to Jews, and although a Jew has not paid for the wine, he then places the wine in the Gentiles' domain in a house that is open to a public thoroughfare until he sells it. The law, the halacha, depends on the circumstances. If this occurs in a city in which there are both Gentiles and Jews, the wine is permitted, as the Gentile does not touch the wine, lest Jews see him doing so. If this occurs in a city in which all its inhabitants are Gentiles, the wine is prohibited unless a Jew sits and safeguards the wine. So remember, the basic concept is that in the period in history where we're talking about, and most of the history of humanity, sadly, all the non-Jews were idolaters, right? So they were constantly committing the sin of idolatry. That's a sin for all people, not just Jews. But Jews have a very special and most stringent obligation to distance ourselves from Avoda Zara, from idol worship in every possible way. So the wine was one of the most common ways in which the idolaters worshiped their idols. As we've been talking about the last few days, they would just very commonly pour out some wine for their idol, at all times of the day when they were drinking, whether it was in front of the idol or not. So wine of idolaters is something we had to distance ourselves from. Nevertheless, we're living in a society, right? The Jews at this time were living surrounded by idolaters, and we had to be able to function and produce wine for ourselves that we could use for Kiddush, to sanctify Shabbos, to sanctify God's name, etc. So sometimes a Jew did not have access, to a Jewish vintner with his own vineyard, and we had to rent, right, the wine press, let's say, of one of the idolaters. Okay, it doesn't matter that he owns it, as long as a Jew now has access to that wine press, probably goes through a cleaning process before he starts, and then supervises the entire production of the wine. That's going to leave the wine permitted for Jews to drink it. What they're asking about here is, okay, well, that's the way he produced the wine, but before he removes it from the property of the idolater, it's going to be stored there for a while. So the real question is, does the idolater have free and easy access to it? What's interesting here, we're going to be talking about in these dilemmas that come up today on this daf, is, what is it that we're concerned about? Is it that the idolater will mindlessly do what he always does, and before taking a drink of wine, pour some out for his idol? Or is he going to maliciously render the Jews' wine prohibited to him, or almost like, behind the Jews' back, spill some of the Jews' wine for his idol as if he's getting one over on the Jews? Now, this second possibility can sound paranoid. I feel like it would have sounded a lot more paranoid 10 years ago. 2025 doesn't sound so paranoid. The way things have been going in the world lately. But let's keep that in mind as we read. Okay. So here they're saying you can rent the property, or you can rent the production facility of the wine so that you can produce wine that's permitted for Jews to drink. And then if you're going to store it there, right, there has to be some kind of checks and balances, right? That we have reason to believe that the Gentile is not going to mess with the Jews' wine and render it prohibited, that it's safeguarded, so to speak, and that the Gentiles, the idolaters, didn't do something that would create a libation for idolatry and thus render the wine prohibited. The Mishnah continues. But the watchman, right, the shomer, the Jews' watchman that's going to make sure that the wine isn't touched by the idolater, but the watchman is not required to sit and guard the wine constantly, even if he frequently leaves the place and comes in again later. The wine is permitted. As long as the Gentile doesn't know when the watchman is coming and going, he's not going to get in there and mess with the Jews' wine. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar says the domain of Gentiles is all one, and the Gemara will explain that when we get to the Gemara. In the case of a Jew who renders the wine of a Gentile permitted by treading the Gentiles' grapes so that the wine can be sold to Jews, and he then places the wine in the Gentiles' domain until he sells it, the law depends on the circumstances. If that one, the Gentile, writes for the Jew, I receive money from you in payment for the wine, even though he did not yet receive the actual payment, but they have a contract, a written contract, the wine is permitted. And this is because the wine is considered the Jew's property and the Gentile does not venture to touch it. But if the Jew desires to remove the wine and the Gentile does not allow him to do so until the Jew gives him the money due to him, this was an incident that occurred in Beit Shan, and the sages deemed the wine prohibited. In this case, the Gentile believes that he has a lien upon the wine, and therefore he has no compunctions about touching it. Touching it. To maliciously render it prohibited? No, because then the Jew won't come and pay for it. So it's more like we're concerned that since he has no compunctions about touching it, hey, there's some wine is stored here, I'll just have a drink. I'll stir it around. It's, he feels that he has the right to do that. He'll mindlessly do it. And that's what we're concerned about, which, by rabbinic decree, would render that wine prohibited. Now, the Gemara questions the Mishnah's distinction between a city with Jewish inhabitants and a city without Jewish inhabitants. The wine should also be permitted in a city in which all its inhabitants are Gentiles, as aren't there Jewish peddlers who travel around the various towns? Consequently, the Gentile refrains from touching the wine, lest the Jewish peddlers see him touching it. So Shmuel says the Mishnah is referring to a city that has double doors and a crossbar, and the residents know when outsiders enter the city. It's like the Jews are watching out for each other, or at least the Gentile is concerned of that, so he's not going to go and mindlessly touch the Jews' wine, nor maliciously. With regard to the Mishnah's statement that the wine is permitted only if the Gentile's house is open to a public thoroughfare, Rav Yosef says, and if a Jew's window is open to that place, it is considered like a public thoroughfare, and similarly a trash heap is considered like a public thoroughfare as many people frequent it. And a palm tree is considered like a public thoroughfare, as the Gentile is concerned lest someone climbing the tree see him messing with the Jews' wine. With regard to a case where the top of the palm tree was cut off, Rav Acha and Ravina disagree. One of them deems the wine prohibited, and one of them deems it permitted. The Gemara explains, the one who deems the wine prohibited holds that since no fruit grows on the palm tree, why would anyone climb up there? The Gentile therefore has no reason for concern lest someone see him, and he has no compunctions about touching the wine. And the one who deems the wine permitted holds that it happens on occasion that someone loses an animal, and he climbs the palm tree to look for it. And the Gentile is therefore concerned lest someone climbing the palm tree see him, and he does not touch the wine. Sounds like in the ancient world, tree climbing was maybe more common than in our world. The sages taught in the case of a Jew who purchases a house, or one who rents a house in a Gentile's courtyard, and a Jew fill the house with barrels of wine. If another Jew dwells in the same courtyard, the wine is permitted. And this law applies even if that Jew does not have in his possession the key to the house or a seal on the barrels of wine. Again, would the Gentile be careful not to mess with the Jew's wine? That's a situation that needs to be, in existence for us to render the wine permitted. Now on page 61b, if a Jew dwells only in another courtyard, the wine is also permitted, but this is only when the Jew has a key to the house or a seal on the barrels of wine in his possession, as this prevents the Gentile from gaining access to the wine. In the case of a Jew who renders the wine of a Gentile permitted, and the wine is in the Gentile's domain, if another Jew dwells in the same courtyard, the wine is permitted. But this is only when the Jew has the key to the house or a seal on the barrels of wine in his possession. And Rabbi Yochanan said to the Tana, reciting the Baraisa, in this case, you should teach that even if that Jew does not have in his possession the key to the house or a seal on the barrels, still the wine is permitted because the Gentile would be careful not to touch the Jew's wine. And the Baraisa continues that the second Jew And the Baraisa continues, if the second Jew dwells only in another courtyard, the wine is prohibited, even when the Jew has the key to the house or the seal on the barrels of wine in his possession. This is the statement of Rabbi Meir. And the rabbis deem the wine prohibited unless a watchman is sitting and safeguarding the wine constantly, or unless an appointed person comes to safeguard the wine. This is referring to a watchman who comes at set times. The Gemara asks, well, to which case in the Baraisa are the rabbis referring? If we say that they are referring to the last clause, this is difficult, as in that case, the first Tana, Rabbi Meir, also deems the wine prohibited. So rather, perhaps they are referring to the first clause of the last clause, with regard to a case where a Jew renders a Gentile's wine permitted by renting the production facility, and another Jew dwells in the same courtyard. Right? He rents it, produces the wine there, then stores the wine, and there's another Jew living nearby. That's what should keep the wine permitted. But didn't Rabbi Yochanan say to the Tana, reciting the Baraisa, you should teach that even if the Jew does not have in his possession the key to the house or a seal on the barrels of wine, the wine is still permitted. So maybe assume that Rabbi Yochanan does not agree with the opinion of the rabbis. So rather, the rabbis are referring to the last clause of the first paragraph in the Mishnah with regard to a Jew's wine that was placed in a house in a Gentile's courtyard. As the first Tana says, if a Jew dwells only in another courtyard, right, a nearby courtyard, but not the same one where the wine is stored, still the wine would be permitted, but this is only when the Jew has in his possession the key to the house or a seal on the barrels of wine. And the rabbis say it is always prohibited, unless a watchman is sitting and safeguarding the wine constantly, or unless an appointed person comes to safeguard the wine. And this is referring to a watchman who comes at set times. Now the Gemara questions this ruling. If an appointed person comes at set times, is this an advantage? No. Right? We don't want a security guard who makes his rounds at the same time all the time. Right? This is detrimental, as the Gentile knows when to expect the watchman, and he may do as he pleases the rest of the time. So it sounds like he's either dipping into the wine to steal it, right? Because it's not his, but he wants to have some. And maybe maliciously render it prohibited for the Jew behind his back, or spill some of that wine for a libation behind the Jew's back. Now, if we're talking about that he's going to get away with that because he knows when the watchman comes and goes, it sounds like it's being done maliciously, not mindlessly. So rather, we mend the Baraisa and teach that the wine is prohibited unless an appointed person comes, and this is referring to a watchman who does not come at set times. Rather, he comes whenever he chooses to do so. The Mishnah teaches that if a Jew renders the wine of a Gentile permitted, by manufacturing it there, and leaves the wine in the Gentile's domain, the wine is prohibited unless a Jew guards the wine, right? The general principle. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar says the domain of Gentiles is all one. And a dilemma was raised before the sages. Does Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar come to be lenient or to be stringent when he says that the domain of the Gentiles is all one? So Rav Yehuda says that Zeri says Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar came to be lenient. And Rav Nachman says that Zeri says Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar came to be stringent. And the Gemara explains. Rav Yehuda says that Zeri says that Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, when he said that the domain of the Gentiles is all one, he came to be lenient. And accordingly, this is what the first Tana is saying. Just as the wine is prohibited when it is left in the Gentile owner's domain, so too the wine is prohibited when it is left in the domain of another Gentile, as the Bailey might allow the owner to touch the wine. And we are concerned that they might be in collusion, and the Bailey will not reveal that the Gentile owner touched the wine, as the owner reciprocates on other occasions. Right? We're concerned that the Gentiles are in collusion with each other against the interests of the Jew. Don't analyze this by like, oh, that sounds so paranoid. Again, it's not so paranoid in 2025, but especially not paranoid in the year 200 or 300 or 400 of the Common Era, when the Jews were surrounded by, really a dangerous mob, especially in Eretz Yisrael under the Roman occupation. And we are concerned about collusion. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar says that not all the domains of Gentiles are considered as one. In what case is this statement that the wine is prohibited said? This applies only when the wine is left in the Gentile owner's domain. But when it is left in the domain of another Gentile, the wine is permitted, as the Gentile refrains from touching the wine when it is in the domain of another Gentile, because his actions might become known. And we are not concerned that the two Gentiles might be in collusion. The Gemara explains the other opinion. Rav Nachman says that Zeri says Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar came to be stringent when he said that the domain of the Gentiles is all one. And accordingly, this is what he was responding to. The first Tana is saying, in what case is this statement that the wine is prohibited said? This applies only when the wine is left in the Gentile owner's domain, right? The Gentile who owns the wine production facility. The Jew came, he made the wine there, he supervised it. That renders it permitted to sell to Jews, but it has to be stored in some kind of supervised manner. Now the Jew leaves, but if they have a contract, then we can assume the Gentile won't touch it. The Gentile has a lien on it, has control over the wine, doesn't have to give it up until the Jew actually pays the money. We say it's prohibited. Another case we've been talking about is that does the Jew leave a watchman, right? Now we're just talking about, well, there's not a watchman, and there's not necessarily a contract. So what are we talking about? Now we're suggesting a case where the Jew stores his wine not in the domain of the Gentile who owns the wine press, but some other Gentile. Now that Gentile doesn't have any kind of a lien on the wine for payment, for the raw materials and rental of the wine press. He's disconnected in that way, and maybe the Jew has a reason to believe that this Gentile will respect the wine and not touch it. This applies only when the wine is left in the Gentile owner's domain, but when it is left in the domain of another Gentile, the wine is permitted, as this Gentile, the second one, refrains from touching the wine when it is in his domain. And we are not concerned that the two Gentiles might be in collusion. Conversely, Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar says, the domain of Gentiles is all one, and the wine is prohibited, as it is possible that the Gentile Bailey is in collusion with the owner. These two Gentiles might know each other and might collude. It is taught in a Baraisa in accordance with the opinion of Rab Nachman, who says that Zeri says that Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar came to be stringent. So no matter which Gentile the wine is being stored at his property, if we don't have the watchman, it's not going to be permitted. It's going to be prohibited. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar said the domain of the Gentiles is all one due to the swindlers. This indicates that Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar is presenting a more stringent opinion. And the Gemara relates that men from the house of Parzak the Vizier, this would be now in Bavel, which is part of the Persian Empire, and Parzak the Vizier is a Gentile. So the men from the house of Parzak the Vizier placed wine that had been rendered permitted by Jews who had not yet paid for it in the domain of their Gentile sharecroppers, right? So the rich landowner, the rich Gentile landowner, moved the Jews' wine that had not yet been paid for to another Gentile's domain. Who? His own sharecroppers. So it's kind of his property, but okay, the sharecroppers have the run of the land that they're sharecropping on. The rabbis who were studying before Rabbah thought to say, when are we concerned that two Gentiles might be in collusion? This matter applies only to a case where this Gentile places items in the domain of that Gentile and vice versa. But here, since the vizier's sharecroppers are not accustomed to place their items in the house of the noble, the Parzak the Vizier, we are not concerned that two Gentiles might be in collusion because that's an imbalanced relationship. The Vizier is obviously much more powerful. I'm almost done. Questions or comments, please get them in now. Rava said to the rabbis, on the contrary, even according to the one who says that we are not concerned that two Gentiles might be in collusion, that statement applies only where the other Gentile is not afraid of the wine's owner. But here, since the sharecropper is afraid of the vizier, he covers up for him and testifies on his behalf that he did not touch the wine. Collusion, and the situation where we're concerned with malicious touching or pouring as libation of the wine that belongs to the Jew. There was a certain city in which a Jew's wine was placed. A Gentile was found standing among the barrels of wine. Did he touch it? No one saw him touch it. Was he holding a stick or a pole that was inside the Jewish barrel of wine? No. He was just standing there. Is this going to render the wine of the Jews prohibited or not? He was found standing among the barrels of wine. Rava said, if the Gentile can be caught as a thief, if he touches the wine is permitted, right? If it's a situation where, if this Gentile touches the wine, he and the Jews and the other people around understand that this would be prohibited and he's acting like a thief, then the wine is permitted because he has fear and he won't do it. Since he's afraid of being caught, he does not have the presence of mind to offer the wine as a libation. But if not, it is prohibited, even to derive benefit from the wine, as it is assumed that the Gentile certainly touched it and offered it as a libation to his idol. And that concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 10, and with it, our discussion of chapter 4. That's what I've got for today. I'm not seeing any questions being passed over to me. So I wish you a beautiful, peaceful, uneventful, healthy good night. And we'll be getting ready for Shabbos very soon, right? It's sunset tonight. We're in Erev Shabbos. All of Friday is Erev Shabbos. So it's certainly not too early to wish you a good Shabbos. All the best, and see you tomorrow, Friday, at the regular Friday time, noon Pacific, God willing. All the best.